Bryan Johnson. An immortal narcissist? Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. You may have come across in the news recently information about a biotech tycoon who spends a lot of money each year to reverse his aging process. What you may not know is that there's quite a lot of interesting information about this individual with regard to his behaviour and his interactions with his fiancée, which bear scrutiny for the purposes of the Tudorscope. There's a lot of information that's contained in an article in the Daily Mail written by Daniel Bates. And accordingly, we're going to go through that and dissect the information that's provided there for the purposes of analysis. The ex-fiancée of the billionaire biotech tycoon who has spent millions of dollars in efforts to reverse the aging process has accused him of manipulative and controlling behavior through their 3-year relationship, and then dumping her when she became ill. Now, of course, for the purpose of this analysis, we're going to proceed on the basis the information contained here is accurate. But I will leave it for you to make a determination, as always, on the veracity of the information. The accusation, of course, of manipulative and controlling behaviour speaks for itself, but let's examine the actual evidence alongside that accusation. If it's correct that Mr. Johnson dumped his fiancée when she became ill, that is an act which is devoid of emotional empathy. Film director and tech artist Taryn Southern says Bryan Johnson, 45, insisted she tell him about all her previous lovers: prying, lack of boundary recognition, sense of entitlement, absence of emotional empathy, cross-examination, and even what sex acts they got up to: lack of boundary recognition, absence of emotional empathy, sense of entitlement. She claims in a lawsuit obtained exclusively by dailymail.com. Defendant Johnson pushed Ms. Southern to share a full list of her past sexual partners with him and describe the sexual acts that took place, the suit states. Johnson allegedly promised to support Southern financially and medically for the rest of her life. Promised gain, future faking, even placing her in an expensive wellness program because he wanted her around forever. Assertion of control, bribery. In exchange, he would receive Southern's companionship as well as her intellectual and professional services, residual benefits, for various business projects and ventures, Southern says in court papers filed in Los Angeles. But after she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2019, Southern, 37, claims the venture capitalist kicked her out of their Los Angeles home and went back on his $149,000 separation agreement. Lack of accountability, absence of emotional empathy, sense of entitlement. Now, we will return to what Miss Southern has to say about him, but an earlier article by Naren Gray Desai, also for the Daily Mail, tells us a bit more about Bryan Johnson, which is worth sharing. A tech tycoon worth nearly $500 million has dedicated his life and body to reverse the aging process: magical thinking, seeking immortality, grandiosity. Bryan Johnson, 45, spends $2 million a year on a team of more than 30 doctors and medical experts that oversee and test almost every one of his organs. Their aim is to engineer his body into that of an 18-year-old. Grandiosity. Johnson wakes up at 5 a.m., a little like myself, takes around 24 supplements a day, and eats a strict vegan diet of blended foods. The process is meticulously documented. He has taken 33,537 images of his bowels and monitors everything from his bone weight to his number of nighttime erections. Fascinating. Assertion of control. He and his doctors claim that in 2 years he has reduced his overall biological age by more than 5 years and now has the heart of a 37-year-old, the skin of a 28-year-old, and the lung capacity and fitness of an 18-year-old. His medical team is led by Oliver Zollman, a 29-year-old doctor researching aging therapies in Cambridge. In his 30s, the entrepreneur founded Braintree Payment Solutions, a hugely successful company which he sold to eBay in 2013 for $800 million. But the lifestyle he once led to build that company left him feeling depressed and suicidal, he told Bloomberg. Pity play, so he embarked on a journey to understand the workings of his body. Along the way, he founded several bio-startups before eventually, 2 years ago, committing to perhaps his most ambitious project yet, re-engineering his body. Godlike status, grandiosity. As part of what he calls Project Blueprint, Johnson lives according to a regime that looks more like a full-time job. He has had his pelvic floor blasted with electromagnetic pulses to improve his muscle tone in hard-to-reach places, and wears glasses that block out blue light for 2 hours before he goes to sleep at the same time every day. He claims to take in an exact 1,977 calories a day, ensuring his body fat levels remain between 5 and 6%. He once suffered an allergic reaction during a procedure in which some fat was injected into his face, causing extreme swelling. On another occasion, his body fat dropped to 3%, heightening the risk of a heart malfunction. My conscious mind is never consulted about what it wants to eat. My body is, Johnson said in a 40-minute YouTube video outlining the details of his morning routine. Grandiosity, magical thinking. These measurements ask my liver and my heart and my DNA methylation what they need to thrive as biological processes and organs for my body. It's not even a guess whether I'm going to have something else, he said, regarding deviating from the diet. It's just out of the question. Johnson says his aim is to ensure that his brain, liver, kidneys, teeth, skin, hair, penis, and rectum are functioning as they were when he was 18. We all want the rectum of an 18-year-old, don't we? The blueprint has that kind of potential of reimagining our relationship, health, and time, and we really could be on the cusp of something dramatically different and better, he added. There is no person in the world who is 45 chronologically, but 35 in every organ, his lead doctor, 29-year-old Oliver Zollman, told Bloomberg. Johnson and Zollman together read the latest scientific literature and use Johnson as a guinea pig to test promising cutting-edge treatments. Zollman oversees dozens of medical procedures on Johnson, many of which are extreme and painful, and measures their results with blood tests, MRIs, ultrasounds, and colonoscopies. For Zollman, the improvements they have been able to make on Johnson's body thus far are just the beginning. We have not achieved any remarkable results, he said. In Bryan, we have achieved small, reasonable results, and it's to be expected. Johnson exercises for an hour a day with more intensive workout sessions 3 times a week. It is integral to his mission that his bodily functions are tested religiously. He monitors his waking body temperature, blood glucose, heart rate variations, and oxygen levels while sleeping. He also undergoes regular tests aimed more specifically at his kidneys, prostate, thyroid, and nervous system. Vanity. Johnson was born into a large Mormon family in Utah. He was raised by his mother and stepfather, who worked as a truck driver. At 19, went on a 2-year mission to Ecuador. As an undergrad at Brigham Young University, he ran a business dealing cell phones to other students, helping him pay his way through college. He then attended the University of Chicago, where he did an MBA and would go on to form Braintree. He also started OS Fund, a venture capital fund whose mission was to invest in entrepreneurs and scientists who were working on quantum leap discoveries that promised to rewrite the operating systems of life. Later, he invested $54 million funding his new venture Kernel, a company with the not immodest goal to build the world's first neuroprosthesis to enhance human intelligence. The company makes helmet sensors which attach to the head to take recordings of brain activity. A father to 3 children, Johnson now lives in Venice, California, in a home he purchased for $5.7 million and later modified to include a full medical suite ahead of Project Blueprint. His lifestyle and obsessive commitment to try and undermine the effects of time, nullifying threat to control, have garnered significant criticism, with many viewers of his online content comparing him to Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. This is expected and fine, he says, of the criticism he's received, nullification of threat to control. What I do may sound extreme, but I'm trying to prove that self-harm and decay are not inevitable, he told Bloomberg. Although the details are unknown, his doctor suggested to the outlet that he is about to embark on some far more experimental procedures, including gene therapies. There's got to be a better way than what's going on now, he said. So a bit more background with regard to him. Let's go back to what Southern says about him. Southern has alleged unjust enrichment, false promise, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. If those allegations are correct, that demonstrates manipulative behaviour and an absence of emotional empathy. In the 27-page complaint, Southern is described as an early creator on YouTube and a successful entertainment figure who was young, ambitious, and hard-working. She also appeared in Season 3 of American Idol, reaching the semi-final, and has made guest appearances on TV shows, including Rules of Engagement and American Dad. It claims she stood to make millions until she met Johnson in 2016, who at the time was a wealthy yet lesser-known entrepreneur who yearned for public recognition. Southern claims that in 2016 her ex was disappointed for not receiving the recognition he felt he deserved, sense of entitlement, and felt discouraged by perceived slights, paranoia, from the powerful tech tycoons of Silicon Valley. The lawsuit states, when he met Miss Southern, he saw an intelligent, attractive, skillful young woman who had the means to find an audience for his ideas and increase his media exposure and popularity, extension of assertion of control, and, of course, facade management. He immediately swept Miss Southern off her feet, potential love bombing, expressing apparent sincerity in his desire to become lifelong partners, future faking. They moved in together within 4 months of meeting, swift cohabitation, sense of entitlement, and by March 2018 the happy couple were engaged to be married. But life with Johnson came at a steep price, it is claimed. While telling her to stop worrying about money and promising to take care of her for the rest of her life, future faking, promise gain, he demanded, sense of entitlement, she devote all of her time, monopolization of time, and creative energy to his personal and professional aspirations. Absence of emotional empathy, sense of entitlement, form of control. The lawsuit states, although Ms. Southern had initial misgivings about working for defendant Johnson, she genuinely believed that he loved her and that he intended to keep his promises. As a result, and in reliance on defendant Johnson's repeated assurances, Ms. Southern made decisions that hurt her own career and left her financially dependent on defendant Johnson, the papers state. If accurate, this shows isolation and alienation. The relationship went south, and in October 2019, Johnson demanded, sense of entitlement, that she move out of the home they had shared for 3 years, lack of emotional empathy, while she was in active treatment for stage 3 breast cancer. She had no independent source of steady income to support her living and medical expenses, the suit states. Southern alleges that Johnson took advantage of her weakened and vulnerable state and leveraged his power and financial control over her to force her. Use of vulnerability, absence of emotional empathy. The aim was to force her to give up her rights to any financial security in the form of a stake in his tech startup Kernel, which he helped to grow. The lawsuit alleges when Miss Southern pushed back, defendant Johnson resorted to threats, manipulation, coercion, manipulation, and manipulation to get her to submit to his demands, sense of entitlement, lack of accountability, lack of emotional empathy. Miss Southern had endured defendant Johnson's pattern of manipulative and coercive behaviour throughout their relationship. However, once in cancer treatment, when aggressive treatments like chemotherapy, radiation, antibody infusions, and targeted therapies left her emotionally and physically vulnerable, defendant Johnson saw his opportunity to force Miss Southern, under an intense and targeted campaign of physical, emotional, and financial distress, to execute an agreement that purported to silence Miss Southern and curtail her entitlement to financial support and payment of outstanding debts and equity in Kernel. Absence of emotional empathy and manipulative behaviour. Southern lawyers added the law does not condone such outrageous conduct, and Miss Southern brings this action to remedy the substantial harm defendant Johnson has caused. The lawsuit details how on their first date Johnson was particularly impressed with Southern's upbeat energy, sense of humour, and unique ambitions. Flattery, character trait acquisition. He told her that he loved the way her brain worked, flattery, and at the end of the date said he had an intense desire to take care of her, it is claimed. Flattery, future faking, lack of boundary recognition. In the following weeks, Johnson moved quickly to romance Miss Southern, love-bombing, telling her that he fantasized about them getting married, idealization, even referring to her as Mrs. Johnson several times. Pet name? Johnson took Southern on romantic trips on his private jet, bribery, and made plans to build a life together, future faking. Within a month of dating, he introduced her to his 3 children, lack of boundary recognition, early introduction to children, and flew her to Colorado to meet his personal doctor, who put her on an expensive personalized wellness program, bribery, which he would pay for the next 3 years. According to the complaint, Johnson said Southern's health was his top priority because he wanted her around forever. Sense of ownership, lack of emotional empathy. Johnson also asked Southern to help him with his business projects, marketing and the development of Kernel, residual benefits, character trait acquisition. Lawsuits said the couples decided to pool their resources, Johnson's money and Southern's emotional support, organizing and planning skills, residual benefits. Johnson promised to share profits from Kernel's eventual success and to take care of Southern for the rest of her life. Promised gain. They moved in together to a rented $2.8 million property in Venice, California, and Southern's career took a back seat as there was no room for it when she was living with Johnson. Monopolization of time. The lawsuit states not only did she have to work around the clock to meet defendant Johnson's mounting needs, absence of emotional empathy, sense of entitlement, lack of accountability, monopolization of time, he also pressed Miss Southern to turn down outside work opportunities and social engagements that he deemed too small, isolation, alienation from outside influences, nullification of potential threats to control. This included pushing her to remove dozens of her most popular monetized YouTube videos, allegedly because they were not aligned with his public image. Vanity, assertion of control. Southern's work for Johnson expanded to blogging for him, residual benefit, writing his speeches, residual benefit, filming him giving talks, residual benefit, hiring an Academy Award-nominated director and production company for a film project and giving him wardrobe advice, residual benefit. She sold her property in Los Angeles and relied entirely on Johnson for support, isolation, becoming wholly financially dependent upon him, she claims. The film project, a movie called I Am Human, about human advancements through technology which starred Johnson, was well received at the 2019 Tribeca Film Festival. But after that, Southern suffered a major setback when she was diagnosed with cancer. Soon after, Johnson allegedly became notably more absent from the home, absent silent treatment, and increasingly emotionally distant, stranger zone, emotional withdrawal. The lawsuit states Miss Southern's own family and friends were stunned by defendant Johnson's seeming disengagement in his fiancée's emotional well-being during such a critical time, absence of emotional empathy. The following month, when she was at her most vulnerable, he told her that he wanted to split up from her, it is claimed. Disengagement, threatened loss, absence of emotional empathy. The court papers say that Johnson told her to move out as it would be very inconvenient for him to do so. Sense of entitlement, lack of emotional empathy. The complainant says, whatever inconvenience defendant Johnson faced paled in comparison to the pressures and stress Miss Southern was going to face in having to search for a place to live and move while recovering from chemotherapy, navigating the unknowns of her diagnosis, and preparing for surgery and radiation at the end of October. Southern claims he offered to pay her $5,000 a month to cover her rent, $7,000 a month for living expenses, and $5,000 a month for moving costs, totaling $149,000. Bribery, promised gain. Over the coming weeks, Johnson allegedly became increasingly hostile at home and refused to speak to her, present silent treatment, except to say she needed to move out as soon as possible. He called her bad deal, insult, and a net negative, insult, referring to her cancer diagnosis, it is claimed. Johnson even allegedly barred her from posting about seeking a new place on Facebook, as it would make him look bad. Facade management. The complaint states, during this time, Miss Southern was terrified by defendant Johnson's demands that she maintain silence throughout their separation, adding to her duress, assertion of control, nullification of threat to control. Southern claims that Johnson's lawyers sent her a letter demanding that for the money she had to agree to a confidentiality clause and issue a joint statement saying the breakup was mutual and lovingly made. Assertion of control, facade management. The statement would say they were best friends and had a cherished friendship. The complainant states Miss Southern was shocked that he would request she publicly lie in order to protect his public image. Because of these issues and at the advice of her attorney, Miss Southern declined to sign this written separation agreement. Johnson responded by allegedly threatening to pursue Southern for half of the rent at their former home for the 3 years she had lived there, use of threat. He fired her from her employment and consultant jobs for his companies, it is claimed, meaning she had no health insurance midway through her cancer treatment, sense of entitlement, manipulation, absence of emotional empathy. In tears, Southern went to Johnson, but he said he would only help her if she signed the separation agreement, assertion of control. In February 2020, she eventually agreed to sign the separation agreement as she was physically and emotionally drained after weeks of radiation therapy. In hindsight, Southern claims that Johnson has a long history of coercion, exploitation, and silencing. Her complaint states, indeed, what Miss Southern now realises is defendant Johnson has been working since the start of their relationship to assert dominion and control over her personal life and financial independence, and to emotionally push her to the limit and submit her to his every whim. In one early example, defendant Johnson pushed Miss Southern to share a full list of her past sexual partners with him and describe the sexual acts that took place, sense of entitlement, prying, lack of boundary recognition. During this demeaning and humiliating exchange, defendant Johnson told Miss Southern that he was concerned about suffering any reputational risk as a result of her having been with or dated other men, paranoia, facade management, nullification of threat to control. In spite of the fact that defendant Johnson had been dating and sleeping with a myriad of women after his divorce and before meeting her. Multiple sexual partners, many intimate partner primary sources, many intimate partner secondary sources. Undoubtedly seamless intimate partners also. Johnson allegedly used burner phones, use of the phone as HQ, secrecy, and made Southern communicate with him on Signal, the private messaging app where he set messages to disappear, assertion of control. Southern had to use an out-of-state mailbox, which was sent on to her via a digitizing platform, which his staff could access, it is claimed. She also had to use aliases for her deliveries and emails with vendors, and he refused to use credit cards or provide a passport at hotels due to privacy worries, it is claimed. Paranoia, nullification of threat to control. The complainant states that Johnson pressured Miss Southern into letting him have sex with other women. Infidelity, obvious behaviours, sense of entitlement, lack of emotional empathy. The document claims, despite her objections and repeated requests for monogamy, Miss Southern estimates defendant Johnson had sex with more than a dozen women, perhaps more, during their time together. Obvious infidelity, lack of emotional empathy, sense of entitlement, assertion of control, triangulation with people. Some of these women he knew. He aggressively pursued and propositioned Miss Southern's own friends, lack of boundary recognition, and acquaintances, while other women were paid prostitutes or girls from sugar daddy apps. Paying for sex, however, was less fun for Johnson than seducing women, and he became obsessed with his sexual conquests and relaying the details of his triumphs to Miss Southern under the guise of radical transparency and honesty, belittlement, invalidation, triangulation with person. Johnson found ways to gaslight or manipulate her objections to his infidelity to make her seem like the insensible one. He claimed she was the one making him feel ashamed, projection, and that if she supported him, it would make his love for her grow more intense, promised gain, use of guilt. If she cried, he told her, she was going through a phase, belittlement, invalidation, it is claimed, even though she had to endure his increasingly unpredictable sexual behaviour. The lawsuit states, rather than bargaining with Miss Southern fairly after the breakup, defendant Johnson directed his legal resources, assertion of control, to overwhelm, threaten and terrify her, and his business is to terminate her work and cut off her income, including her pay for work already completed. He even instructed his law firm to fire her so that she would be without legal representation, so that he could more effectively pressure her to sign off on her rights. The lawsuit has been sent to arbitration and is currently set for a status conference in May before a judge in Los Angeles. An attorney for Southern would not comment when contacted by dailymail.com. Lawyers for Johnson did not immediately respond. In their response, lawyers for Johnson said that the complaint states no claim and that Southern has no right to any of the damages sought, denial, nullification of threat to control. The response calls Southern a sophisticated operator and that Johnson only made her vague promises and that she voluntarily entered into a separation agreement when the relationship was over to release him of all claims. 18 months later, she is trying to walk away from it and her other contractual obligations, the document states. The response goes on to accuse Southern of extortion and claims that she threatened to make outlandish and salacious allegations about Mr. Johnson in a public forum unless he paid her exorbitant demands. Nullification of threat to control. Plenty of detailed information there about the behaviour of an individual who is in a sense trying to make himself immortal by reducing his age. A godlike approach and such magical thinking commensurate with the behaviour of someone that's a narcissist. There's plenty of evidence with regard to this behaviour and others that I have read about that supports that this is an individual that shows many signs of a sense of entitlement, a lack of accountability for his behaviours, considerable grandiosity, magical thinking, haughty behaviours, a wide array of manipulative behaviours, no boundary recognition, various aspects in detail of the narcissistic dynamic, and an absence of emotional empathy, and therefore would score highly in that regard, which would have him seen as most definitely being a narcissist. He is an individual that shows so many signs across the various fields that support that one would conclude from the information that's provided so far and other information that I have read that Bryan Johnson is indeed a narcissist. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.